Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 27th, 2024. Tonight was a broadcast that I bring to you by request. It's probably one of the most common older ones that I would do, talking about aftercare, specifically talking about aftercare after Evoke. And I'm going to talk about our wilderness program quite a bit this evening, but I'm also going to make reference to if you're attending one of our intensives. So, because as you know, maybe one of the most popular things that people say about treatment programs and treatment interventions is that the program is only as good as its aftercare and follow-up. Before I get into that, I'm going to talk about the one thing tonight. The one thing I want to talk to you about is our Finding You workshop. We have a Finding You workshop July 24th through 28th in Midway, Utah, outside of Park City, Utah. I can't say this clearly enough. I can't tell you this with too much emphasis, but Finding You is a great springboard into what is your work. I think that the thing I like to say about Finding You the most is that if you come away understanding what your project is, then we've been successful. And it's a compassionate, connected, safe place to really discover what went on in your childhood, how you were programmed, and really what it felt like to be a child. And then to make the connection between that experience and what's going on in your relationships today, both positive and challenging. We believe that the heart of the work is finding out and uncovering the history of your childhood, and that the research is very clear that if you want a secure attachment, if you want a successful marriage, that all of that starts with the relationship that you have with yourself, and finding out who you are, becoming more clear and in touch with who you are is, of course, the foundation for that self-compassion and that self-awareness and that primary relationship. So the next offering is July 24th through 28th in Midway, Utah. That's an in-person Finding You. Everything is included, 4.5 days. I will tell you that you will be nervous. You will want to cancel. You'll find all the reasons in the world not to come. You'll even dread it after you sign up for it. And I would say, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but somewhere in the very, very high 90% numbers, in the high 90s, people will come away with it saying it was one of the most transformative experiences in their life. And I can say this with the utmost confidence. I've been doing it myself as a participant, of course, with somebody else for many years now, and it's something I go back to often. So with that, I want to talk about aftercare. I've shared this quote recently on a couple of occasions, especially with regard to our live question and answer. And the quote is from the teacher, the philosophy, religion teacher, Buddhist teacher, Alan Watts. And he said, problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. Why I think this quote is so important is because I think so much of our questions, there's an old saying that if you ask the right question, you're 90% of the way toward the answer. And I think when people ask, what should I do? How long should my child stay? Should I send my child to a program? Should I bring my child home? What should be the right aftercare? And the reason that those questions become impossible to answer is because it is a question being asked in the wrong way. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is how to measure, how to decide, how to figure out what is the way forward, what is the path forward for you and for your child. Related to this, I want to start off with the premise that Evoke was never designed to be a total fix. It was never designed to take children, young adult and adolescent children, from the beginning to the end all the way. It was an idea about really getting people into the work, and not just the identified patient, which we of course do in a very immersive, experiential way, but really to get the family involved. I really think of this as a family systems intervention. And there's something that happens. In fact, the attendees tonight can be the first sign of evidence, right? Your first article of evidence that when children are sent to our program, we accept the premise that they're struggling. We accept the premise that they need safety and containment. And then after we establish that and we begin to work on them, work with them, really, then we try to pull the parents into it. And this issue, whether it be a spouse, a child, this issue about somebody going away to treatment is really just the idea that the individual in the family is like an extension of the organism of the family. And there might be one symptom bearer, but that symptom bearer, in essence, is giving voice unconsciously through their symptoms. They're giving voice to something in the family that's not working, something in the family that needs adjustment or awareness or some light shed on it. A couple of quotes from one of my favorite writers in Jungian psychology, James Hollis. He says, "Life is not a disease, and a neurosis is not a cancer to be excised. Any seeming resolution today will have to be revised tomorrow, for the psyche is a flowing river, and yesterday's resolution is tomorrow's constriction." And of course, Carl Jung himself said, "We cannot live in the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be of little in the evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." Psychotherapy is about a transformation of consciousness, a different way of being, becoming, of course, more aware, more in touch with our wounds, our diagnosis, our style. I make the comment often that at our dinner table, we've had at times a discussion over the years, all of our family members, not instigated by me or my wife, but by the children often, of saying, what is your go-to style of manifesting symptoms? They don't say it that way. They say, what is your diagnosis? Under stress, what would you look most like? And what my children are illustrating in their question is that under stress, all of us have a preferred way of coping. It might be self-medicating with substances or sex or gambling. It might be self-harm. It might be isolation. It might be suicidality. It could be people-pleasing. There are a host of ways that people manifest the symptoms. And all those symptoms is the unspoken, the unrealized work. The symptom, if we listen to it as a messenger, is asking us to look at it, to pay attention to some part of us that is avoided. So the child in this case doesn't come to evoke to be fixed. The individual adult doesn't come to evoke for an intensive to be fixed, but they get in touch with their issue. They understand, what's my project, what's my style, what do I do under stress, and really, in a very simple way, that's the mental health journey, is becoming aware of yourself. I've been in therapy, and I've mentioned this countless times for many years, and I don't think there's ever an arrival point. There's never a place where I'll arrive at and say, this is where I'm healthy. And by the way, my attendance in therapy all these years isn't a burden. I don't go to it thinking that it's more work or that I have to improve myself or I have to work harder. I go to it to rest. I go to it to relax, to be seen, to be understood, to be loved, and in essence, to be compassionately looked upon by somebody. And it's in that safe container, in that space, that I can discover who I am. Because my background has taught me that who I am is unacceptable. So our interventions are a start. They're a springboard. They're an accelerator. Yes, I do believe, and I see, and to me, the evidence is clear, that an immersive program like our nature-based therapy program, our wilderness therapy program, or our intensive program are months of therapy, if not years of therapy, packed into a relatively short period of time. But they were never intended to be the end. In fact, when we first designed our curriculum in our wilderness therapy program, we came up with 4 phases or stages that our clients, our students, would go through. We specifically designed the 4th stage, the final stage, as one that many people wouldn't arrive at. And when we noticed that, we asked ourselves, is this what we want to do? And the answer was, of course. I think it illustrates the point that you're never done, that the journey continues. And we changed what a lot of people called graduation or commencement. At the end of the program, we call transition. Because even if you're going home, it's just a transition. It's just a point in time when you're leaving one context and going to another, but the work continues. And I would even say the work is harder, more difficult after an immersive program like this. So let's talk about what we try to accomplish. We think of wilderness therapy as a wake-up call, getting the attention of the child and creating a new bottom. That idea that, I'll often sit in front of a child and say, is this where I want to get you out of here as soon as possible? Is this where you want to be? Is this where your thinking and your behaviors brought you? Can you see that at this point? So it creates a new bottom, a new awareness of where their best thinking has taken them. And it does get their attention, their focus. I remember I had a client, excuse me, an employee years ago, a therapist, who left a residential treatment center, a longer term aftercare program, and came to us. And he left at a time when some of the students were able to, of his current caseload, were able to transition out of the therapist. Some of them were able to graduate and go home. And his clients, there were a couple that weren't quite done, but they thought it would be counterproductive to transition them to another therapist that late in the process. So he brought them with us. He brought those clients with him, excuse me. And he was telling a story a couple of weeks into his process, into his joining us. And he was describing one interaction with one of these two clients that he brought with him from the residential treatment center. And as he entered in therapy, the client started badgering him, started arguing, started debating with him. And the therapist said, after a while, I just said to the client, like, I can just leave. We don't have to do this. I don't have to impose this on you. And as he stood up to walk away from the session, not reactively, but calmly, the client or the student called him and said, please don't leave. Come back. I want to talk. And so you see that the intervention creates a kind of a focus, a willingness to listen. Sometimes it's a crisis management to buy some time. Making long-term decisions for short-term crisis sometimes is not the best planning. And so sometimes in a crisis, it's an opportunity to interrupt that crisis. Obviously, there's therapeutic benefit. That almost goes without saying. But we see clients. I have clients that reach out to me, former students and clients that reach out to me from years ago, who will still talk about the lessons and the conversations. Even my own son, my own 31-year-old son, can share with you the handful of seminal messages that he received from his wilderness therapy experience. So there's definitely some benefit. There's a value to feedback, right? You can have testing. That's something that can be accomplished. But beyond the testing, it's just an opportunity to watch somebody in a microcosm of their life. The small group living becomes um, an isomorphism. It's a small version of the larger universe. So when young people are talking to me about their relationships with the staff, or their relationships with each other, you can hear in those stories the echoes of the life that they came from. Many parents will say to us after describing the first week with their child and how it went, they'll say, you get my child. You're seeing all the things that my child sees. And when you take a child, or anybody for that matter, to outpatient therapy, you don't get that kind of glimpse. You rely typically on self-report. And self-report, we all know, is unreliable. But wilderness therapy brings it up, exposes it, creates an opportunity for us to see how the individual is functioning. Establishing family work, like I mentioned, I really do think of our program as a sort of a Trojan horse. The gift is we treat the child, but after that is begun, like I said, you bring in the family. And this is not bad news. This does not mean that you are pathogenic. This just means when you have a child that's struggling, there's some extra resources and support that you need. You need some outside attention. It doesn't make you any different from me. I mentioned just moments ago that my son is an alumni of a wilderness therapy program, of our wilderness therapy program, actually. And it didn't mean that I was somehow greatly flawed. It just meant that I couldn't do it. I needed some help. I needed somebody outside the system to offer support, to offer perspective, to offer an intervention to my son, because my interventions, my ideas for him were too threatening. My ideas would rob him of his identity, but somebody more distant and detached could offer that without that conflict. So family work is important. Developing ideas. Honestly, the parents who love Evoke the most have varying degrees of success when it comes to measuring their child's progress, from the low to the high end. But the parents who become lifelong fans of the work are the ones who allow their parallel process in the program to change them. And they will tell you, it's an awakening. It changes their work relationships, their spousal relationships. It changes them, which in turn changes everything else. It prepares Willer's therapy, prepares the client for the next step. I often talk about this graduating process from resignation to acceptance to even investment. There are a lot of clients over the years that have said to me, yes, of course I want to go home, but I'm afraid if I do, I'll go back into the same patterns. I've had people years later saying that if I didn't go to Evoke, if I didn't go to where I went afterwards, I don't know if I'd be here still now. So it prepares people for the work, whatever that work looks like next. It has a softening effect. Being in the wilderness is humbling. I essentially lived in the wilderness for many years because I was in the field every week for many, many years. And it's humbling. I remember when I visited my son and it was raining and storming and I was frustrated. I was there as a participant. I owned the program. I was the boss of the program, if you will. But now I was in the role of a parent. I followed all the protocols that all other parents follow, gave up my keys, made sure I had no medication from home. And then I sat there in the rain and the thunder, and I was frustrated, waiting to get to what I thought was the therapy. And therapy is the rain. Therapy is the cold. It is the heat. And those elements that are absolutely uncontrollable become metaphors for life that happens to us, for loss and for trauma. There's so much talk today. Everybody that I know above a certain age talks about how today's culture can be over identified with diagnosis and with therapy, that they're over therapized, over accommodated, that they identify with multiple diagnoses, and that limits them, and that there's a lack of resilience. I hear that consistently from parents, from people of parent age and into their 30s and 40s and so on. I hear that constantly. Wilderness therapy is the antidote for that. Because on top of the traditional therapies, it is a program that is experiential, that you have to deal with the weather, you have to deal with Mother Nature, and she can't be negotiated with. The rain doesn't care. The shelter that you built at night doesn't care of your intentions or your good heart. It just responds to the way that you made it. Sometimes the level of aftercare can change, right? You can move to a less acute aftercare. Sometimes, and more over the course of my career, there's more children going home. Still not the majority by any means, but more children are going home or to intensive outpatient programs where they can live at home. And that can be the function of a very powerful immersive intervention like Evoke. Obviously, socialization skills, those with nonverbal learning disabilities and those on the spectrum can, in a safe context, learn new socialization skills and new learn ways of being with peers. Like I mentioned, there's assessments that are both formal and informal. An important part for me that I need to say tonight is I believe in the role of an educational consultant and interventionist. Some people call themselves therapeutic placement specialists, but I believe in that role. When I had my son, I did not think he was going to come to my program when my son needed some help. I didn't think that made sense. I expected him to go somewhere else, but of course I was too close to it. So I brought and I hired an educational consultant that I respected, and she offered me a discount because we had a professional relationship. And I said, I don't want a discount. I want to pay you the full price because I want to be able to ask you for all the things that all of your other clients ask for. And she became somebody who gave me perspective, who challenged me, who they become quality assurance advocates. And she was the eventual one who came up with the idea that he should come to my program. And she made a very compelling case for it. And that in the end was the final decision. And it was the right one for our family. So these consultants and placement specialists or interventionists really serve a nice complement to your therapist and can help you decide the next stages and operate as a case manager and as a quality assurance advocate and as somebody that's a third party that can give you perspective. When you're looking at aftercare, after Evoke, you're looking at length of stay. How much does my child need something that's not mainstream? We talking 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year? and that's something you're considering. You're looking at insulation versus involvement. Let me explain this idea because it's important. One of the things that makes wilderness therapy so dynamic and successful is that parents and children aren't talking every day. And that insulation removes, it gets parents out of the seat in the roller coaster. I remember years ago, I was working as a parent coach, and I asked the parents of a young adult man, a young man in his early 20s. I said, "How has it been going this week?" And one of the parents told me everything that happened Friday morning, Friday afternoon, Friday evening about their child, Saturday, Sunday, Sunday evening, and this was Monday. And I thought, that's too much information. It's really important. We love our children the most. Nobody's going to vie for that position. But sometimes that doesn't give us the clearest vision. We have to take some distance. I drop my children off at their, with their coach, their gymnastic coach, their softball, their baseball coach, and I drive away because they need to learn to operate in the world and deal with various personalities, with honestly with various levels of social skills and leadership skills. So ask yourself, are we ready to be in that much contact? Do we still need time away? Are things still raw and volatile? What level of tolerance does the program have? Tolerance means we talk about, does it have a high ceiling and a low floor? And what I mean by that is if your child reverts to old behaviors, which they probably will at some point, self-harm, right? School refusal, depressive episodes, whatever it is. If they resort to that, is this a program that can say, we work with that? Or is this a program that says, well, now your child doesn't belong here anymore? So understanding tolerance is important. Knowing that there is going to be, with that equation, the high ceiling. Sometimes programs offer a lot of opportunities to interact with mainstream society, to maybe go to a public school even, or go out for field trips, or do things outside. It's not a locked facility. They get to make choices. The box, right? The small box that they were in wilderness therapy is now larger. And that's something they want. They definitely want the larger box, but it doesn't make it easier. The bigger the box, the harder, because children learn by failing. Actually, I shouldn't even say children. Humans learn by failing. If I were to ask you all, what are your greatest lessons, your greatest wisdom? Inevitably, the stories and the wisdom that you would share with me would be based on mistakes that you've made. I know all the wisdom I have that is really, I know at a felt sense, at a felt level, comes from the mistakes that I've made. And that's what children do. And our anxiety as parents, our desire, our want for them to stay safe, sometimes come into conflict with those choices. So does the program provide opportunities for choices and regression that then the clinical team, the therapeutic team, the milieu can deal with? How much of a buffer is there? Are they allowed to talk to you once a week, twice a week? How many visits are there? Again, we want families to be together as much and as soon as possible. But if things are volatile, if nervous systems are dysregulated, if there's reactivity, not much learning is happening. Not until nervous systems are regulated again. How clinical is it? Is it experiential? Are they using adventure activities? Are they using sports or music or art to teach? Or is it a more traditional clinical setting? And what's the fit for your child? How much is the academic focus? The most common complaint on our applications is school problems. In wilderness therapy, you're taken out of, in a large degree, you're taken out of school. We do have some curriculum, but it's minor compared to what happens in mainstream society. So children with learning disorders, disabilities, children that have school anxiety or social anxiety as it relates to school, pressure. A lot of our kids, so many of our kids are bright. I want to share with you, just the other night, I was sitting with two other professionals. I was sitting with a graduate of a wilderness program and somebody that probably would have been at a wilderness program had his parents known about it. And all of us, and then me, and we were all in the treatment field, and we were all talking about our passion for helping young people, specifically young men, because that's what my colleague primarily treats. And at one point, I just observed, I said, we were all these kids. And what I want is for these kids 20 years from now to be sitting around a table talking about their successes and their passions. And the reason that I and these other two men do what we do is because we want to help the kids that are like us that have the potential. Where, in a way, in a very compassionate way, the systems and the structure failed them. Right? Wasn't my mother said to me in her late years, she said to me at one point, she said, "You were too big for me. I didn't know what to do." She didn't use the word, but essentially she was saying I was outmatched. I was out of resources. So academic focus, parental involvement. How much parental involvement? A lot, a little, and that varies. That's going to be part of the decision, part of the evaluation of what's the next step. Of course, home is, of course, nearly like it was before, near 100% parental involvement. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to not be reactive? Is your anxiety still easily triggered? Mental health or addiction, how do they treat it? Do they treat it as co-occurring? Is it a 12-step model? That's really important to ask and to know about, both from your wilderness therapist, but also from your consultant or your placement specialist. Is co-ed indicated or not? And in many cases, it's not indicated because people get distracted, although more and more we see transgender, LGBTQ, gay students, so the co-ed thing isn't as much of an issue, but it still is for the majority of our kids. Is it insurance-based? Is that something that needs to be considered? Small group living environments, kind of like family style. Intensive outpatient programs, I've said this for years. If there were more intensive outpatient programs, and luckily, since I did this last, the proliferation of intensive outpatient programs has grown exponentially. These are multi-day programs that your child lives at home, but they go to groups and activities at night. You go 1 or 2 nights a week also. Outpatient therapy. Is your child ready for outpatient therapy? That's a big step down. A big step down. And I get asked the question all the time, should I force my adolescent child to go to therapy? My response is changed somewhat over the years. And very clearly what I would say to you is, I think outpatient therapy is one of the most difficult things to participate in, to get something out of. It's very, very hard. It takes a lot of motivation to be able to see yourself honestly and to give an honest self-report. And so forcing someone to go makes it even harder. I'm not a fan of forcing adolescents to go to therapy. I am a fan of requiring family therapy. But individual therapy, it's like 12 steps. It works and supports people who want the help. But outpatient therapy requires a lot of intrinsic motivation on the part of the client to be successful. And even then, it is challenging. Is it a residential treatment center? Like I said, do they live in families? Sometimes these programs are outside the US. There are a few programs over the years that I visited that I absolutely love because it's a cultural immersion, right? We have certain American ways of thinking. And so some of these programs introduce a culture that is family focused, for example, much more than America's very much individual focused. Very much about individuation and autonomy. And some of these other cultures offer a different perspective. Like I always talk about, that idea that the fish is the last one to discover water. We learn about our current context by being outside of it. Go and visit a third world or a second world country, and you'll see, if you haven't done it, you will see America more clearly. Is 12-step indicated, like I said. In the 12-step world, they talk about primary care, which is the level that in mental health that Evoke would call. Evoke fits into the primary care model. Extended care would look like sober living, where they're living in a community, but they're living in a sober environment with a lot of support around them. So how do you decide? First of all, ask tough questions. Ask tough questions of your consultant, of the therapist, of the program. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. This is the most important thing in your life, your child, and ask tough questions. I always say you deserve to ask difficult questions and you deserve intelligent answers. I might not always have the solution for you. If I'm your child's therapist or your therapist, I might not know all the answers. But what I do have is an explanation about what I'm seeing, what's not working, and some measure of where we're at. For self-assessment, I think maybe the one lesson I would want to give parents tonight is a lot of this has to do about your readiness. It's not just what your child. I remember I told the story a few times. I had this mother that I was working with, this family I was working with, the child, and he went to aftercare and then he went to college straight after aftercare. And at one point the mother called me to give me an update and she said, "We just got back from a tour of schools, of colleges." And then she said, "And my son resorted back to all several of the same kind of behaviors, the same kind of thinking that caused us to send him to you in the first place." But she said, "I'm not calling because of that. I'm calling because I responded to it differently. I'm calling to say that I'm proud of myself because I handled it differently." That's the gold moment. That's where the parent is the adult, the child is the child. That's where the parent is focusing on what they can control instead of what they can't control. That's where the parent has come to understand that the only thing they have control over is themselves, their reactions. And yes, how they react, what they do has an impact on their child. But fundamentally, the focus is on them. Find out about who the therapist is going to be, what their training is, what their specialty is, who they work with. Like I said, working with a placement specialist, I'm a huge endorser of that. If you're considering out of home placement, if your child is out of Oak and you don't have a placement specialist, I stand by the idea that they offer an invaluable service. It's not just about giving you a list of programs. You could probably, through a lot of work, come up with those. But the specific culture of the program at the time, the specific therapist that is there, again, giving you perspective, somebody that is independent, that can give you their feedback. Like, "Mom, Dad, you're being too anxious. You're being too, you're being reactive." Or, "Yes, I'm going to talk to the program, have them get their stuff together because they dropped some balls." They provide that independent reference point. Talk to former parents, parent reference lists. You're going to be talking to admissions for sure. Now, remember, the admissions folks aren't the people that are going to be with your kids, but you start to get a flavor for the culture of the program. If you can tour programs, do. Just feel it. Talk to the students if you can. And again, they're going to choose students who are doing well, but listen to all the students. Listen to the ones that are struggling. You can decipher and discern the truths and even in the lies that children tell or that people tell. So if somebody has a very soured view of something, you can hear, you can feel it. Does that sound like your child? Does this person sound angry and vindictive, or do they sound sincere and balanced? Talk to students, ask all the questions. Sometimes I get asked the questions, why won't the professional give me their best choice? Because it has to be your choice. If you get a list of schools from a placement specialist, from a consultant, from an interventionist, if you get a list of schools, programs from a professional, those programs are good enough. And every program is going to be imperfect. Evoke is imperfect. I drop balls. We will drop balls on occasion. Can we be accountable? Can we own it? Can we apologize? Can we get to the business of making it better right away? So you get to make your choice. Back to that very first slide that I shared with you from Alan Watts, that quote, "Problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. The work is that you get to decide and that nobody can live your life for you. Yes, this is important. Listen to experts, take it into consideration, but fundamentally and ultimately don't abdicate the responsibility of the choice, because at some point, the choice will be tested by your child, by some interaction, by mail that was lost, by another student after a home visit, somehow bringing substances back. Something like that will happen. Students having sex, something will happen at some point. And can you rest on the foundation that you made the best choice that you can, and that you can continue to work with the program in the way you have up to that point? Again, money insurance is important. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your choice. When we're talking about transitioning to aftercare, we're talking about making it seamless. One of the biggest lessons I learned, it wasn't my son that was fragile during transition. It was me. Absolutely. And if it's even more raw than that and more difficult, you can do something like have extended time with your son in the field. I remember when I was in wood shop in middle school, and the assignment was to make a breadboard. I think probably that's the assignment in most wood shops. You just glue a bunch of different kinds of wood together, and you cut and you sand it and you level it out together. Well, there was one that had been glued the day before. And I remember the wood shop teacher taking this breadboard and breaking it over his knee. And then he showed us and he said, if the wood breaks somewhere in the middle, it was glued correctly. But in most cases, and in fact, the one that he was showing us, it will break at the seams because that is the most vulnerable point. The time in between is vulnerable. And if you made the decision and you're confident in your decision, make it as seamless as possible, and know that it's that your visit before transition and after your child has settled into and stabilized in the new program are going to be much more beneficial than that time in between. Getting buy-in from your child comes after you close the door for coming home. What I mean by that is, if you're still waffling and you're trying to convince your child that aftercare, that more treatment is necessary or beneficial or required for his or her safety, their safety, then they're more likely to resist it. But children whose parents make the decision, however human and imperfect and fallible that is, when they make that decision, it's usually only then that the child will accept the decision and begin to invest in it. Oftentimes, I tell parents, just tell them that you're working with professionals and that you're going to be listening to the recommendations. You're not saying you're going to follow them, but you're going to be listening to them. Definitely do not sell aftercare to your child. That's the biggest, most common mistake that parents make. As they start to describe all the wonderful things about the program. I have seen that fail many, many more times than I can count. It's not that different than when a new movie comes out that you've been looking forward to forever, and you have high expectations and you go to it. It's really hard to live up to the hype. That's the best case scenario in these situations. But selling it to your child, it's a boundary violation. It's getting inside of their circle, their truth. I think what we're seeing with today's children is some evidence of our lack of boundaries, right? We are inadvertently, unconsciously asking our children to take care of us. So we want our children to agree. We want them to like it. We want them to buy into it. Because we're afraid of being wrong, making a mistake, of being rejected by our own children. So don't sell it to your child. Every time you find yourself saying something positive or optimistic about the program, maybe mention something that they won't like, something that they will struggle with. Remember this. If any of you have ever juggled 3 balls, I can juggle 3 balls, okay. But if you can't juggle 3 balls, I think the analogy still can be a nice illustration. I can juggle 3 balls really well. Now, if you hand me another ball or 2, if it gets to 4 or 5, I can't juggle those at all. I can probably go for about 3 seconds at best. It doesn't mean that I've forgotten how to juggle. It just means that there's more to pay attention to. So regression after evoke, which is inevitable. whether it be home, an IOP, or an aftercare setting, a residential setting, you're going to see regression. That's a powerful thing. And if you find yourself getting very anxious and reactive to that, that's work for you to work on. It doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean that it's not, you don't come by it honestly. It just means that it's something to work on. I always say about treatment that the highs aren't that high and the lows aren't that low. That's one of the liabilities of being a parent whose whole heart is invested in the child. We ride the roller coaster. But in therapy, we think about when it goes well that it's going good, and when it goes bad, it's still going good. We're still learning something. If we learn this way, if we learn by our mistakes, then they must learn by theirs. And remember, we're always transitioning in life, right? We're changing schools, we're changing phases of development, we're changing to coupleship, we're changing to having children, we're changing jobs. We're always transitioning. And that is when we are most stressed and most vulnerable. A lot of children will talk about when they leave Evoke. When they first get to us, of course, it's a grief, it's a loss. And many of them have that same feeling. They will say in many cases that this is the safest place that they've ever felt. And then sometimes they'll even acknowledge that it's the easiest place they've ever been because emotionally it was so supportive. They were allowed to be mad, they were allowed to be sad. And that wasn't always the case at home. So they'll talk about leaving home to go home. I get asked all the time, is my child being honest? And I always say, that's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for, is it internalized? Does it have legs? Is it going to last? And my response is, we'll see. And in most cases, change doesn't happen with simple awareness. It takes time. And sometimes people want to go back out there and try again. They talk about that in addiction and recovery. People want to go back out and just to make sure that they're not an alcoholic. They'll try drinking again. It's the same with our children. If your child is coming home, if that's your aftercare solution, it's going to be more challenging. You're going to need more resources. Go to 12-step meetings. Get a therapist for you. Listen to the podcast, the books. Continue to get parent education support. I love when parents tell me, after being introduced to the curriculum and the communication, I don't know what to say anymore. I used to apologize for that because there's shame associated with it. And I would say, good. Anytime you're learning a new skill, it's going to be awkward. I've had tennis coaches. I've had golf coaches. When they change my grip, I look at them like they're crazy. It feels so foreign and awkward, but that's what happens when we interrupt old patterns that are comfortable to us. Learn about your own co-participation. How is my identity wrapped up in this child? How do their successes feel like my successes and their failures feel like my failures? How am I at times incapable of responding to them with a regulated nervous system? I've shared with you that my youngest will not often, but she'll say to me now and again, and I've learned, she hasn't said it in a long time, because if I get really dysregulated, she'll say to me, Dad, you're dysregulated. I don't want to talk until you're regulated again. And she's never been wrong. Not once that she said that to me. And because she said that to me, I haven't had to say it in a long time. But you start to learn how you are inadvertently reinforcing patterns of behavior that you don't want to be reinforcing. So you've got to be constantly looking at yourself, understanding the guilt and shame that everybody in the family is dealing with. Yours is no less than theirs. We worry about what people think when they find out our children go to programs, or that we're going to a therapeutic intensive, or that we have therapy. I remember I had an employee I'd hired some years ago, and after listening to some of these broadcasts, she said, aren't you worried that people are going to not find you credible because you talk about going to therapy? And I thought, I said to her, I haven't thought about that in a long time, but I do remember thinking about that when I was younger. But now, that's the only person that I would trust. as my therapist. Somebody who's working on themselves. It would be hard to go to a physical trainer who was dramatically out of shape, for example, right? That's not inspiring, doesn't give you confidence in the process. Guilt and shame is universal. Developing response flexibility, that means that your healing and your trauma is being worked on, that you can react proactively, creatively, not like a knee-jerk response. And mostly embracing the journey, walking slowly. I love what the Buddhists say. You can have peace in the present moment. And if you're waiting to arrive, you'll find it never comes. I've heard a numberless amount of parents give this lecture to their children. So I, in turn, am giving it back to you. You embrace the journey. It's like what Kobe Bryant said when he was interviewed and asked, do you play to lose, play not to lose, or you play to win? He said, neither. I play to learn. And in that way, embracing the journey, he set up a mindset where everything was beneficial. And learning that what is happening is what's happening instead of what should be. A lot of us want to get back to real life, or back to the way things were, or back to normalcy, or back on track. And the fact of the matter is, this is the track. This is the lesson. This is what the universe or your higher power, they haven't forgot about you. Your higher power hasn't forgot about you. You're not outside of the universe. It's happening. This is it. This is the place. Right now, if you're listening to me live or listening to me recorded, this is where you need to be. And then, of course, learning that you're only in control of what you're in control of. It's really important that you get enough support for you and that you work through the shame to do that. This will require much more capacity than you might imagine to ask for help. The greatest predictor, they say, of marriage quality is expectations going into it. If you expect it to be perfect, you're going to be disappointed. If you expect it to be work and rich and difficult and meaningful and amazing and messy, you have a much higher likelihood of assessing your marriage as a higher quality later on. You learn to let go. You learn to hold on loosely. You learn that it's too early to tell. If you had taken a snapshot of me when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, you would have thought I was going to end up dead or in jail or living on the streets. And of course, part of that struggle is what informs me and wants me to come back and to help you and your children today. When my son was there, they kept on saying, he was 14, they kept on saying he's not done. And I said, of course he's not done. I'm not done. At the time, I was 40 years old, and I said, I'm not done. How do I expect him to be done? But I'm ready. So I encourage parents, bring them home when you're ready. When you're ready for the heavy lifting and the heavy work to begin, bring them home. That's when the hardest work begins. So when your child is in treatment, say all the hard things. And I know a lot of parents say to me, why should it be that my child should suffer because of my not being ready? And my answer is, do you hear that question? Children always suffer from our undone work. And there's no way to get around that. We have to accept it. We have to lean into it. We have to work on ourselves. When I see students and clients afterwards, what is their work? Oftentimes they've weaponized the skills. They're better at manipulating. They don't want to do the skills. I tell my young people, please use your therapist. Find a therapist that you trust and use them. I say to the students in the field, I'm your best chance at getting some meaningful change in your parents. And I promise you, the kinds of things that we're working on will be beneficial to you for the rest of your life. So use your therapist. And some of them don't want to. Sometimes they just pay attention to how little the parents have changed. But I say to both parents and children, don't plan on the other one changing. Plan on nobody else in your family changing, and then act accordingly. And any change, any improvement on their part will be absolute icing on the cake. I think students and clients in aftercare underestimate context. They think that they can raise their peers up. Context matters. People in early recovery for alcoholism don't hang out in bars. You have to change your playground and your playmates. When I got out of treatment when I was 17, even though I never committed to sobriety, I actually tried to when I was home. And my friends were ultimately overtly supportive of me being sober. But I was hanging out with the same friends and they were smoking pot all day. And eventually I did. Watch out for the black and white thinking and overconfidence. Parents struggle with that feelings need to be solved, that they want their kids to get it. Parents want it to be easy. They also struggle from black and white thinking. And when it's going well, they suffer from the we've arrived mistake and the honesty trap. It's not about your child's honesty. They believe what they're saying a good portion of the time, but it's not realistic for change to happen as quickly and dramatically as most young people and most older people think and say. And then, of course, they focus on what they can't control. I came up with this tool. We have a broadcast on it. There's a chapter in my book. There's a blog on our website. I came up with the 8 tools for transforming relationship, the things that I saw that families who identified themselves as successful, what they used. And the 8, very, very briefly, it is using I statements. I feel, I think, I believe, I want. Listening better. That's, wow. I do talk for hours on that. Listening. On the front end of sharing feelings, asking the other person if they can listen or problem solve, whatever your desire is. And when you're on the receiving end of somebody sharing, ask them what they want. Do they want you to listen, or do they want you to offer ideas or suggestions? Avoiding words like should, ought to, good, bad, right, wrong. Language that tends to be triggering. Avoiding polarizing language like always, never, all or nothing, either or. Avoiding advice. I make it my practice to never give advice or give advice as little as possible. That doesn't mean that my sphere of influence is small. It means that it's bigger. It means that people listen to me more because I give less advice. Developing compassion toward yourself and toward others. And then learning to know yourself well enough to remove yourself from a situation and take a time out. Remember, they're not fixed when they're done with the vote, no matter where they go. When I first started this, my bias was that all kids should go home. This was a tough intervention. It was a dynamic intervention, and therefore I wanted all kids to go home. And I learned through experience that that was unrealistic. So we do have a bias toward aftercare settings, but it's not a philosophical bias. It's a bias based on experience. One time I was talking to somebody who works in one of those wraparound programs where they have coaching for the children and they have coaches for the parents, mentors for the children, coaching for the parents. And my colleague said to me, we see success with, of course, with parents who are invested and children who are invested. We don't see a lot of children invested, she said. She said we have almost no success with situations where neither the parent or the child is invested. But she said the surprising thing to her was that she sees almost as much success when the parent is motivating and the child isn't, as when they're both motivated. It's almost the exact same outcomes and success rates. So your motivation, your commitment to things will make the difference. And it's exhausting. And it's lonely to carry the load yourself. I had a parent one time ask me in a meeting, how can I get my 9-year-old to understand their place in the home and their responsibility? And I said, I don't know that it's going to come through a lecture. I think for that age group, it might be behavioral. Kids learn from the outside in. We think that people learn from the inside out, right? You have an epiphany, you have an insight. an aha moment, and you change. But more often than not, we change from the outside in. It's really important to understand that some of these problems are developmental, and we can improve the situation. We can provide them safety and treatment, but some of these things are going to be something that is enhanced as their prefrontal cortex and their brain matures. I find the behavioral contracts are worthless unless the parent uses them as a tool for their own confidence and clarity. But never in my history have I ever seen a child violate a rule in a behavioral contract, followed up by a parent pointing it out, and I've never seen the child respond well to that. I've never seen them say something along the lines of, "Oh, yes, I see how I've made a mistake here, and I see it's clearly spelled out." And I think parents want the behavioral contract to do the work, and especially if the child signs it while they're in treatment, that contract would be thrown out in court every day. They would easily, and it would stick. They would say, "I signed this under duress. I signed this to come home." So use a behavioral contract for you, but not necessarily for them. The goal in therapy, no matter how I spell it there, the goal in therapy is to keep going. Just keep going. It's a lifelong journey. I had what my therapist said. She's never said this. 2 weeks ago, I had a session where my therapist said, "This is the biggest thing you've ever done in your life." This particular session I had. I'm 56 years old. It's 25 years into therapy with her. I'm learning more in 2024, healing more in 2024 than I have in the last 5 years combined. We continue to grow. Go to meetings, find therapy, find a place where in relationship with somebody else, you can sort yourself out. Take risks. You're going to make mistakes. When you get corrected with a skill that you're using or not using, you're not being punished, you're just being corrected. But if we're so sensitive and we have to get everything right, it will feel devastating and humiliating to us. I've mentioned that we have a bias toward aftercare. Tell your therapist what your needs are at Evoke. Tell your therapist at the intensive what your needs are. Ask for help, ask for resources. Be honest with yourself about your reservations. Not having enough time, that's not really an excuse. Because if you don't take the time for treatment and for support, more time will be required later. It really takes a great deal of courage to be honest with yourself. Ask tough questions of professionals. Ask about parent involvement, family involvement, length of stay. How will they make use of the initial work that you've done here? Will the therapist talk to the therapist here? Will your intensive therapist talk to your home therapist if you come to an intensive? At the end of the day, when it comes to your child's treatment, do all that you can do and then let it go. And barring something dramatic, let your child be the determining factor about whether or not it's successful. Own the decision, own the boundary, don't sell it. Take it a step at a time. I like to tell parents, I say it tongue in cheek, I never say it straight faced, but I say to them, just assume your child is being assigned by the therapist to regress, to relapse, to struggle as an opportunity for you to learn how to parent more. If you want the tools that I found to be most helpful for parents leaving Evoke and Aftercare, basically just people, the 8 tools for transforming relationships, resources I mentioned earlier are those. Most importantly, focus on your regression, your progress, your relapse. When I hear a parent or an individual in a couple talking about their relapses and their struggles, their regression, I have all the confidence in the world in that person's ability to make it through. When I hear them obsessing about other people's relapse and regression, my confidence wanes. Take it a day at a time. Learn your own triggers. Find people to support you and focus on the journey. Keep going. I tell people when I train therapists, if you can inspire them to want to come back, to want more, to keep going, you've won. Doesn't matter if it's 12-step support groups that are free, psychotherapy, reading, self-help, meditation. And it's not because you're broken and you're working on it. It's because you're finding greater and greater peace. The load becomes lighter, not heavier. If it feels heavier and heavier, push through that until the load lightens and lifts. All right, folks. Other Parents Like Me is somebody we've recently partnered with. You can go to oplm.com and you can sign up there for a parent-to-parent mentoring program, 17 weekly Zoom meetings a week, and you can have a 1-month free premium membership using the code Finding You. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned before, July 24th through 28th is the next in-person intensive. I will be doing one right outside of New York City, July 31st through August 4th. That's the only Finding You that I'm going to be doing in 2024. July 12th through 14th, we have an online Finding You that is free for current wilderness families. And if you don't want to go to an online one, you can apply the price of that toward an in-person. I cannot recommend too strongly participation in our Finding You. I'm going to be doing a Finding Connection workshop with couples. That's 4 couples. We have a spot for 1 couple left. That's in September. So for sure, it's going to fill up. You can find on our website or by going to intensives@evoketherapy.com more information for custom family intensives or couples or co-parenting intensives. We have support groups for current alumni families. For our current families, it's once a week, July 27th. That's tonight, right now. Jump off if that's you. 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and once a month for alumni only of our wilderness program. July 15th is that next offering. We have intensives and coaching support groups for our current and alumni of those programs. July 8th is that next offering at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Go to our website, use the QR code, or go to supportgroups.com. If you want a virtual coach to work with who understands the attachment model, the evoke model, the evoke way, contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to be matched up with one of our coaches. All these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can also go to our YouTube channel and watch the video rebroadcast of these. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And of course, Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks. I'm off for the rest of the week. I'm going to see you on Tuesday, July 2nd. I will take a live Q&A. Any questions, suggestions, copies of slides, anything you want. If you send in questions in advance to webinar@evoketherapy.com, we will answer them during the broadcast, and you can listen to them live or via the podcast recording. So any way you want to contact us and give us questions, make suggestions, ask for things, the email is webinar@evoketherapy.com. So I'll see you next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for those that requested it, I hope it gives you some perspective and some tools for thinking about the decisions that you need to make for you and your child, for your family. And for on behalf of those that you love and those that love you, thank you for showing up and listening and watching and for doing this work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.